The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets leading to the royal palace. Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform one last time as he took his position at the east gate. He had been a palace guard for 3 years and every day felt the same. Stand straight, check identification, follow protocol. Never deviate from the rules. Marcus was 28 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind brown eyes that his mother always said were too gentle for a guard's work. But he needed this job. His younger sister Emma was studying medicine, and their father had passed away 2 years ago, leaving the family with mounting debts. The royal grounds were buzzing with activity that Tuesday morning. Tourists lined up early to catch glimpses of the palace, while staff members hurried back and forth preparing for the day ahead. Marcus recognized most of the regular faces: the gardeners, the kitchen staff, the maintenance crew who kept everything running smoothly. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to the visitors' entrance. Marcus watched as a well-dressed woman stepped out, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement. She wore a navy blue business suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Behind her, a younger woman emerged from the passenger seat, looking nervous and constantly glancing around. The older woman approached the guard station where Marcus's colleague, Officer Reynolds, was checking credentials. Marcus couldn't hear their conversation from his position, but he noticed the younger woman hanging back, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small purse. Something felt off to Marcus. In his 3 years of service, he had developed an instinct for reading people. The older woman's smile seemed forced, and the way she kept placing her hand on the younger woman's arm appeared controlling rather than supportive. The younger woman's eyes darted toward the exit repeatedly, as if calculating escape routes. Marcus tried to shake off his unease. He reminded himself that palace security had multiple layers, and Officer Reynolds was experienced. If something was wrong, Reynolds would handle it according to protocol. Marcus's job was to focus on his own post, not to second-guess his colleagues. But as the two women passed through the security checkpoint and entered the palace grounds, Marcus couldn't ignore the sick feeling growing in his stomach. The younger woman looked back once, and for a brief moment their eyes met. In that instant, Marcus saw something that chilled him to the bone, pure terror. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Marcus tried to concentrate on his duties, but his mind kept returning to those frightened eyes. He found himself glancing toward the palace entrance every few minutes, wondering what was happening inside those ancient walls. During his lunch break, Marcus sat alone in the guard's break room, picking at his sandwich without appetite. He had always been the type of person who followed rules. His training had emphasized the importance of protocol, chain of command, and staying within designated responsibilities. Palace guards were not investigators or detectives. They were there to maintain order and security through established procedures. Yet something nagged at him. He thought about his sister Emma, studying to become a doctor because she wanted to help people. She had always told him that sometimes helping others meant taking risks, even when it wasn't your official job to do so. Marcus finished his break and returned to his post, but the afternoon brought no relief from his growing anxiety. He noticed that the black sedan was still parked in the visitors' lot, which struck him as unusual. Most tourist visits lasted 2 to 3 hours at most. These women had been inside for over 4 hours. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself watching other guards and staff members, wondering if anyone else had noticed anything unusual. But everyone seemed focused on their own responsibilities, moving through their routines with practiced efficiency. The palace had strict visiting hours, and closing time was approaching. Marcus knew that all visitors would need to exit the grounds soon. He positioned himself where he could see both the main entrance and the visitors' parking area, telling himself he was just doing his job by monitoring the exit flow. At 4:45 p.m., 15 minutes before official closing time, Marcus saw the two women emerge from the palace. Even from a distance, he could see that something had changed. The younger woman moved differently now, more slowly with her head down. Her earlier nervousness had been replaced by something worse, a defeated, hollow expression that Marcus recognized from his own mother after his father's funeral. The older woman still maintained her confident demeanor, but there was something predatory in the way she guided her companion toward the car. She kept one hand firmly on the younger woman's elbow, steering her with what appeared to be gentle assistance but felt more like control. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of staying at his post as protocol demanded, he began walking toward the parking area. He told himself he was just making sure all visitors exited safely, but deep down he knew he was breaking protocol. As he got closer, he could hear fragments of their conversation. The older woman was speaking in low, urgent tones about keeping promises and remembering agreements. The younger woman said nothing, just nodded mechanically as she was led to the car. Marcus was now close enough to see the younger woman's face clearly. What he saw there convinced him that protocol was no longer his primary concern. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smeared, and there were what looked like finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. Every instinct Marcus had developed over 3 years of security work, every lesson his father had taught him about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, every value his family had instilled in him pointed to one conclusion: this woman was in danger, and he might be her only chance for help. The black sedan's engine started, and Marcus realized he had only seconds to decide. Follow protocol and let them drive away, or trust his instincts and act on what his heart told him was right. He made his choice. Marcus stepped forward just as the older woman was opening the driver's side door. His heart pounded, but his voice remained steady as he approached them. "Excuse me, ladies," he called out, his hand resting casually on his radio. "I need to conduct a routine security check before you leave the grounds." The older woman turned sharply, her polished smile faltering for just a moment before snapping back into place. "A security check? We already went through security when we arrived. Surely that's sufficient." Marcus had no authority to conduct exit security checks. The palace had never required such procedures, but his training had taught him that confidence could often create authority where none officially existed. "New protocol, ma'am," he said firmly, "just implemented this week. Won't take but a moment." The younger woman looked up for the first time since leaving the palace. Her eyes met Marcus's again, and this time he saw something different alongside the fear, a flicker of hope. "I don't see why this is necessary," the older woman protested, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "We have an important appointment to attend." Marcus noticed how she positioned herself between him and the younger woman, effectively blocking any direct communication. This only strengthened his conviction that something was terribly wrong. "I understand your urgency, ma'am, but palace security takes precedence over all other concerns. I'm sure you understand." Marcus kept his tone professional while mentally preparing for whatever might come next. He turned his attention to the younger woman. "Miss, could I see your identification, please?" Before she could respond, the older woman intervened. "She's with me. I can vouch for her identity." "I appreciate that, ma'am, but protocol requires individual verification." Marcus stepped slightly to his right, creating a clearer line of sight to the younger woman. "Ma'am, your ID, please?" The younger woman's hands shook as she reached into her purse. Marcus could see the older woman's jaw tighten with barely contained frustration. When the younger woman handed over her identification, Marcus noticed her fingers were ice cold despite the warm afternoon. The name on the license read Sarah Mitchell, age 22, with an address in a small town about 2 hours away. Marcus made a show of examining the ID while actually studying Sarah's face. Up close, he could see that the bruises on her arm extended higher than he had initially thought. "Sarah," he said gently, using her name deliberately. "How was your visit to the palace today?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the older woman immediately stepped closer. "It was wonderful, wasn't it, dear?" Sarah's always been fascinated by royal history. Marcus noticed that Sarah flinched slightly when the woman moved closer. He also observed that she hadn't actually answered his question herself. "That's nice to hear," Marcus continued, keeping his eyes on Sarah. "What was your favorite part of the tour?" Again, the older woman began to answer, but Marcus held up a polite hand. "I'd like to hear from Sarah herself, if you don't mind. We like to get feedback directly from all our visitors." Sarah looked terrified. She glanced quickly at the older woman, then back at Marcus. The gardens were beautiful," she whispered. Marcus knew the palace tours didn't include access to the private gardens. Only special VIP tours or private meetings included garden access, and those required extensive advanced security clearance. Either Sarah was lying or something had happened during their visit that went far beyond a standard tour. "The gardens are lovely this time of year," Marcus agreed casually. Which section did you enjoy most? The rose garden or the herb garden? Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She obviously didn't know how to answer because she had never seen any gardens. The older woman's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Listen, officer, the older woman said, her voice now carrying a hint of threat. We really do have somewhere important to be. I don't appreciate being detained without cause. Marcus realized he was at a critical point. He had no legal authority to detain anyone. And if the older woman decided to leave, he couldn't physically stop her without serious consequences. But every fiber of his being told him that Sarah was in danger. He made another decision that defied protocol. Instead of stepping aside, he moved closer to Sarah. Sarah, are you here of your own free will? He asked quietly, ignoring the older woman's sharp intake of breath. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Marcus thought she might speak. But then the older woman laughed, a sound as cold as winter rain. Of course she is. What a ridiculous question. Sarah is my niece, and we're here on a family trip. Right, dear? Marcus noticed that this was the first time the older woman had claimed any family relationship. Earlier, she had simply said Sarah was with her. Sarah, Marcus said gently, is this woman your aunt? The silence stretched between them. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, the distant sounds of traffic, and somewhere in the palace grounds a gardener's lawnmower. Sarah looked at the older woman, then at Marcus, then down at her hands. She began, her voice barely audible. Don't answer that, the older woman snapped, dropping all pretense of politeness. We're leaving now. She grabbed Sarah's arm, and Sarah winced visibly. That small reaction confirmed everything Marcus had suspected. Without thinking, he stepped forward and gently but firmly placed his hand on the older woman's wrist. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you not to touch her like that. The older woman's eyes blazed with fury. How dare you? I'll have your job for this. Do you know who I am? Marcus had been waiting for that question. In his experience, people who were truly important rarely felt the need to ask if others knew who they were. No, ma'am, I don't. But I do know that I've witnessed what appears to be assault, and I have a duty to investigate. It was a bluff. He had witnessed firm handling, not clear assault. But sometimes bluffs were necessary to protect innocent people. The older woman released Sarah's arm and stepped back, clearly calculating her next move. Marcus could see her weighing her options, trying to decide whether to continue the confrontation or try a different approach. You're making a terrible mistake, she said finally. This is going to cause problems for people far above your pay grade. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The threat was clear, and he suddenly realized that he might have stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than he had initially thought. But looking at Sarah's frightened face, he knew there was no turning back now. Maybe so, he replied, but I'll worry about that later. Right now I need to ensure everyone's safety. He reached for his radio and everything changed. The moment Marcus's hand touched his radio, the older woman lunged forward with surprising speed. Her manicured nails raked across his wrist as she tried to grab the device from his belt. Don't you dare, she hissed, her polished facade completely gone now. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Marcus stepped back quickly, protecting his radio while maintaining his position between the woman and Sarah. The scuffle lasted only seconds, but it revealed something crucial. The older woman was desperate to prevent him from calling for backup. Sarah, get behind me, Marcus commanded, his training kicking in as the situation escalated. Sarah moved quickly, circling around to stand behind Marcus. He could feel her trembling as she pressed close to his back, seeking protection. The older woman stood breathing heavily, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled and her business suit wrinkled. You're making the biggest mistake of your career, she snarled. Do you understand what happens to guards who don't follow orders? Marcus keyed his radio with deliberate slowness. This is Unit 7 requesting immediate assistance at the East Visitor Parking Area. Code Yellow situation in progress. Code Yellow was palace terminology for a situation requiring supervisor attention, but not yet at emergency level. Marcus hoped it would bring help without triggering a full emergency response that might spook the older woman into doing something desperate. Unit 7, this is Control. Nature of Code Yellow? Marcus could feel the older woman's eyes boring into him as he responded. Potential visitor distress situation. Request supervisor response. Copy Unit 7, supervisor en route. ETA 3 minutes, 3 minutes. Marcus realized he needed to keep everyone calm and in place for 3 more minutes. But the older woman had other plans. She suddenly shifted tactics, her demeanor changing completely. The rage disappeared, replaced by a concerned, motherly expression as she looked toward Sarah. "Darling, tell this nice officer that everything is fine," she said in a voice dripping with false sweetness. "Tell him how excited you are about our trip." Marcus felt Sarah press closer against his back. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I want to go home." Those 5 simple words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had been right to trust his instincts. The older woman's mask slipped again. "You don't mean that, dear. Think about what we discussed." "Think about your family." Marcus caught the emphasis on family and realized it wasn't a loving reference, it was a threat. "Sarah," he said without turning around, "whatever she's told you about your family, whatever threats she's made, I promise you that we can get help." "She doesn't know what she's saying," the older woman interrupted quickly. "She's had a difficult day. She's confused." Marcus finally turned slightly so he could see both women while keeping himself positioned protectively. Sarah's face was streaked with tears, but her eyes showed a determination that hadn't been there before. "I'm not confused," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I know exactly what's happening to me." The older woman's composure finally cracked completely. "Shut up," she snapped. "Just shut up and get in the car right now." "She's not going anywhere with you," Marcus said firmly. That's when he noticed the black sedan's engine was still running. He also noticed for the first time that the windows were heavily tinted, too heavily tinted for standard vehicles. And there was something else that made his blood run cold. Movement in the back seat. There was someone else in the car. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his radio again, but before he could call for additional backup, the rear door of the sedan opened slowly. A large man in an expensive suit stepped out, moving with the fluid grace of someone trained in violence. The man was perhaps 40 years old, with cold gray eyes and hands that looked like they had seen their share of unpleasant work. He didn't speak immediately, just assessed the situation with the calm calculation of a professional. "Problem?" he asked the older woman, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. "The guard is being difficult," the woman replied, some of her confidence returning now that backup had arrived. Marcus realized his situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. 2 against 1. With Sarah caught in the middle and his supervisor still minutes away, he made a quick tactical decision. "Sarah, I need you to walk slowly toward the palace entrance," he said quietly. "Don't run, just walk normally." "She stays here," the man said, speaking for the first time directly to Marcus. His tone was conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made it more threatening. "This is palace property," Marcus replied, trying to project authority he wasn't sure he possessed. "I'm responsible for the safety of all visitors, and I'm not comfortable with this situation." The man smiled, an expression that never reached his eyes. "Your comfort isn't really a concern of ours." Marcus noticed that the man's right hand remained inside his jacket. The implication was clear, even though no direct threat had been made. "Look," Marcus said, changing tactics. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. Why don't we all just calm down and wait for my supervisor? He can sort this whole thing out." "No supervisor," the older woman said quickly. "We're leaving now. Sarah, get in the car." Sarah didn't move. Marcus could feel her gathering courage behind him. "I said I want to go home," Sarah repeated louder this time. The man's expression hardened. Everyone wants things they can't have. That's when Marcus heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the crunch of gravel under approaching footsteps. Sergeant Davies, the shift supervisor, was arriving ahead of schedule. "Thompson, what's the situation here?" Davies called out as he approached the group. Marcus had never been so happy to see his supervisor in his entire career. Davies was a 20-year veteran with the kind of presence that could calm most situations just by arriving. But as the sergeant drew closer, Marcus saw something that chilled him. The man in the expensive suit had withdrawn his hand from his jacket, and now Marcus could see what he had been concealing. The situation was about to become far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. "Sergeant," Marcus called out, his voice carefully controlled, "we have a complex visitor services issue here that may require additional resources." It was code, hoping Davies would understand that this was not a routine situation. But Marcus wasn't sure if help would arrive in time, or if anyone truly understood what they were all walking into. Sergeant Davies approached with the measured pace of someone who had handled countless difficult situations. His experienced eyes quickly took in the scene, the running car, the tense body language, Marcus positioned protectively in front of Sarah, and most importantly, the way the man in the expensive suit was standing. "Good afternoon, folks," Davies said in his calm, authoritative voice. "I'm Sergeant Davies, Palace Security Supervisor. I understand there might be some confusion here that needs clearing up." The older woman immediately stepped forward, switching back to her polished persona. "Sergeant, thank goodness. Your officer here has been delaying our departure for no reason. We simply want to leave after our lovely visit." Davies nodded politely, but Marcus noticed his eyes never left the man by the car. 20 years of experience had taught the sergeant to recognize danger, and something about this situation was setting off all his internal alarms. "Of course, ma'am. These things happen sometimes. Thompson, why don't you fill me in on the visitor services issue?" Marcus understood that Davies was giving him an opportunity to explain, while also assessing the threat level. "Sergeant, I observed some concerning interactions and felt it necessary to verify that all visitors were departing voluntarily and safely." It was careful language. But Davies caught the underlying message immediately. The sergeant's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his radio. "I see," Davies said slowly. "And you, young lady?" He addressed Sarah directly. "How are you feeling about your visit today?" Before Sarah could answer, the man in the expensive suit finally spoke. "We appreciate your concern, Sergeant, but we really do need to be going. Business doesn't wait." Davies turned his full attention to the man for the first time. "And you are?" "A friend of the family," the man replied smoothly. "Just helping with transportation." Marcus noticed that the man hadn't provided a name and his accent seemed to have disappeared. Davies noticed too. "I'd like to hear from the young lady herself," Davies said firmly. "Miss, do you feel safe and comfortable with your current situation?" Sarah looked at the older woman, then at the man, then back at Davies. Marcus could see her internal struggle, fear warring with a desperate desire for help. She began, then stopped. The older woman moved closer to Sarah. "She's just tired, Sergeant. It's been a long day." That's when Davies noticed what Marcus had seen earlier, the way Sarah flinched when the older woman approached her. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step back, please," Davies said, his tone shifting from polite to authoritative. The man in the expensive suit tensed visibly. "Sergeant, I think you're overreacting to what is clearly a family matter. Then you won't mind if we take a few more minutes to make sure everyone's comfortable," Davies replied. He keyed his radio. "Control, this is Davies. I need a female officer to respond to the east parking area for a welfare check." Marcus felt a surge of relief. Davies understood the gravity of the situation and was calling for backup without escalating to emergency status. The older woman's face flushed with anger. "This is harassment. We've done nothing wrong. No one said you had, ma'am," Davies replied calmly. "We just want to make sure all our visitors have had a positive experience." But the man in the expensive suit had apparently heard enough. He moved away from the car door, positioning himself where he could see both guards clearly. "I think this has gone far enough," he said quietly. Davies's 20 years of experience kicked into high gear. "Sir, I'm going to need you to keep your hands visible at all times." "Of course," the man replied, but his hands remained at his sides in a position that would allow quick movement. Marcus felt Sarah grab the back of his uniform jacket. She was terrified, but she was also making a choice to stay close to protection, rather than comply with the older woman's demands. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "when Officer Martinez arrives, she's going to want to speak with you privately. That's normal procedure for welfare checks." "There won't be any private conversations," the older woman snapped. "Actually, ma'am, there will be," Davies corrected her. "Standard protocol for welfare checks includes private interviews with all parties involved." The man stepped forward slightly. "Perhaps we could expedite this process. What exactly do you need to be satisfied that everything is in order?" Davies studied the man carefully. "I need to be satisfied that everyone here is acting of their own free will and isn't being coerced in any way." "And how do you plan to determine that?" "By asking the right questions in the right environment," Davies replied. That's when Marcus heard a car door slam somewhere behind them. Officer Martinez was arriving, but the sound seemed to trigger something in the man's decision-making process. You know, the man said conversationally, sometimes situations become more complicated than they need to be. Davies's hand moved to his radio again. Control, expedite that backup request, and add a supervisor from the main building. The older woman looked panicked now. This is ridiculous. We're leaving. Sarah, get in the car right now. Sarah stays until we complete our welfare check, Davies said firmly. That's when everything went wrong. The man reached into his jacket with lightning speed, and Marcus saw the flash of metal. Training took over as he pushed Sarah behind him and shouted a warning to Davies. But Davies was already moving, his own radio flying to his mouth as he called for emergency backup. Control code red, East parking area. Armed individual officers need immediate assistance. The older woman screamed something Marcus couldn't understand, and Sarah cried out in terror. The peaceful afternoon had exploded into chaos, and Marcus realized that his decision to ignore protocol had uncovered something far more dangerous than a simple domestic dispute. As sirens began wailing in the distance, Marcus found himself at the center of a situation that would test everything he believed about duty, courage, and doing what was right even when the rules said otherwise. The real fight was just beginning. The sound of approaching sirens seemed to freeze everyone in place for a crucial moment. The man with the weapon hesitated, clearly not expecting such a rapid emergency response. Davies used that split second to position himself tactically, while Marcus pushed Sarah further behind the cover of a nearby concrete barrier. Armed police response incoming, Davies announced loudly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had handled dangerous situations before. Sir, I strongly advise you to place that weapon on the ground immediately. But instead of complying, the older woman suddenly grabbed at Sarah's arm, trying to pull her toward the car. We're leaving now, she shrieked, her composure completely shattered. Marcus found himself caught between protecting Sarah from the armed man and preventing the older woman from dragging her away. In that moment of split focus, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. She broke free from the older woman's grip and ran directly toward the approaching police sirens, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. The man with the weapon turned to pursue her, but Davies stepped into his path. That's far enough, the sergeant said, his own hand now on his service weapon. What happened next unfolded in seconds that felt like hours. The armed man realized that his situation had deteriorated beyond salvage. Police cars were now visible approaching the palace gates. Sarah was safely running toward help, and 2 experienced security officers were blocking his escape routes. He made a calculation that Marcus would later realize showed just how dangerous these people really were. Instead of surrendering, the man grabbed the older woman and began backing toward the black sedan. Nobody follows us, he called out, or she gets hurt. Davies keyed his radio again. Control. Suspects attempting to flee with hostage. Need perimeter units at all exits. Marcus watched in amazement as the older woman, who had seemed so controlling and threatening just minutes before, now looked terrified as she became a victim of her own associate's desperation. Please, she gasped as the man dragged her toward the car. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. The man ignored her pleas, keeping his weapon visible as he forced her into the passenger seat. Marcus realized with growing horror that they were witnessing the collapse of what had probably been a carefully planned operation. Davies, Marcus called out. Should we pursue? Negative, Davies replied firmly. Our priority is the victim's safety and securing the scene. By now, Sarah had reached the first responding police car. Marcus could see her speaking rapidly to the officers, gesturing back toward the parking area. More vehicles were arriving every few seconds. Palace security, local police, and what looked like unmarked cars with serious-looking people inside. The black sedan's engine roared as the man attempted to flee. But Marcus noticed something the driver hadn't. Palace security had quietly activated the vehicle barriers at all exits when Davies called for code red. The car wouldn't make it 50 yards before hitting immovable steel barriers. Sure enough, they heard the screech of tires and the crash of metal on metal from the direction of the main gate. Davies was already coordinating with the arriving officers, directing them toward the crashed vehicle. Thompson, Davies called, stay with the victim. Make sure she gets medical attention and is ready to give a statement. Marcus jogged toward where Sarah was standing with the police officers. She looked exhausted and traumatized, but also relieved. When she saw him approaching, she actually managed a small smile. Thank you, she said simply. If you hadn't stopped them, you don't need to thank me, Marcus replied. I just did what anyone should do. One of the police officers, Detective Chen, according to her badge, approached them. Officer Thompson, I understand you initiated the intervention that led to this situation? Marcus nodded, suddenly aware that he might face serious consequences for violating protocol. Yes, ma'am. I observed what I believed to be signs of distress and potential coercion. Detective Chen made notes in her pad. Your supervisor speaks very highly of your instincts and professionalism. We're going to need a detailed statement from you, but first, excellent work. Over the next hour, Marcus learned the true scope of what he had stumbled into. Sarah Mitchell had been kidnapped 3 days earlier from her college campus, but no one had reported her missing because the kidnappers had used her phone to send fake messages to her family, claiming she was taking a spontaneous trip with friends. The older woman, whose real name was Elena Vasquez, was part of an international trafficking ring that specialized in targeting young women with no immediate family oversight. The palace visit had been intended as a meeting with potential buyers, disguised as a tourist excursion. The man, who was identified as Viktor Kozlov, had an extensive criminal record in 3 countries. He was currently unconscious in a police vehicle after the crash, but Detective Chen assured Marcus that he would face serious charges once he recovered. Most importantly, Sarah was safe. She had been through a horrible ordeal, but she was alive, free, and would receive all the support she needed to recover and testify against her captors. As the scene was finally secured and statements were taken, Sergeant Davies approached Marcus with an expression that was hard to read. Thompson, we need to talk about what happened here today. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had saved someone's life, but he had also flagrantly violated established protocols. In his 3 years of service, he had never stepped outside his designated authority. Sergeant, I know I didn't follow proper procedures. Davies held up a hand to stop him. You're right, you didn't follow procedures. You saw a situation that didn't feel right. You trusted your instincts, and you took action to protect someone who needed help. Marcus waited for the reprimand that seemed inevitable. That's exactly what a good security officer should do. Davies continued. Procedures are important, but they're tools to help us do our job, not chains that prevent us from doing what's right. The relief Marcus felt was overwhelming. But Davies wasn't finished. However, there will be an investigation. Anytime weapons are involved and emergency protocols are activated, there has to be a full review. You'll be on administrative leave pending the outcome. Marcus nodded, understanding that this was standard procedure regardless of the circumstances. But Thompson, Davies added with a slight smile, I have a feeling this investigation is going to conclude that you acted with exceptional judgment under extraordinary circumstances as Marcus walked back toward the palace to begin the paperwork that would document the most important day of his career. He thought about the chain of small decisions that had led to this moment, trusting his instincts, ignoring protocol when it conflicted with protecting someone in danger, refusing to look the other way when everything in him said something was wrong. He thought about Sarah, who was now free to continue her life and education. He thought about how many other young women might have been saved because this trafficking ring had been exposed. But mostly, he thought about what his father had always told him, that a person's character wasn't defined by following rules, but by doing what was right even when it was difficult or dangerous. Today, Marcus had discovered what kind of person he really was. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in a conference room deep within the palace administrative building, surrounded by people whose titles he had only heard whispered in hallways. The internal affairs investigation had been thorough, involving interviews with everyone from palace security to international law enforcement agencies. Detective Chen sat across from him, along with Chief Inspector Williams from the Metropolitan Police, Captain Morrison from Palace Security, and a woman in an expensive suit who had introduced herself only as Ms. Harrison from the government office that handles international crime, cooperation. The investigation had uncovered far more than anyone had initially expected. The trafficking ring that Elena Vasquez and Viktor Kozlov were part of had been operating across 5 countries for over 3 years. Sarah Mitchell was their 14th known victim, but authorities suspected there were many more cases that had never been reported. Officer Thompson, Chief Inspector Williams began, your actions 3 weeks ago have had consequences far beyond what you could have imagined. Marcus felt his palms sweating. Despite Sergeant Davies's reassurances, he still worried that the investigation might conclude he had overstepped his authority in dangerous ways. The information we've gathered from Elena Vasquez and the evidence found in their vehicle has allowed us to dismantle an entire criminal network, the chief inspector continued. We've made arrests in London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Prague. 12 young women have been rescued, and we've prevented countless future crimes. Detective Chen leaned forward. Viktor Kozlov has been cooperating with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's provided details about their operation that we never could have obtained otherwise. They were using tourist locations and cultural sites as meeting points because they appeared innocent and were less likely to attract police attention. Ms. Harrison spoke for the first time since introductions. The palace, specifically, was chosen because of its security presence. They believed that conducting business near royal security would make their activities appear legitimate to any observers. Marcus found his voice. They were hiding in plain sight. Exactly, Ms. Harrison confirmed. And they might have continued doing so if you hadn't trusted your instincts about Sarah's distress. Captain Morrison, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke. Thompson, I've been in security for 25 years. I've seen officers follow protocol perfectly and still fail to protect people. I've also seen officers break every rule in the book while trying to do the right thing. What you did required judgment, courage, and a willingness to put someone else's safety above your own career security. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled officials. Am I in trouble? Chief Inspector Williams actually smiled. On the contrary, the Crown Prosecution Service has commended your actions. The international law enforcement community has taken notice and... He paused for effect. The Palace Security Administration has some things to discuss with you. Captain Morrison opened a folder in front of him. Thompson, your performance during this incident has demonstrated qualities we look for in specialized security roles. How would you feel about a transfer to the Protective Services Division? Marcus's mind reeled. Protective Services was the elite unit responsible for directly safeguarding members of the royal family and visiting dignitaries. It was a position that required years of experience and additional training. He had never imagined such an opportunity would be offered to someone with only 3 years of service. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. The qualification we value most, Captain Morrison interrupted, is the ability to recognize danger and act appropriately under pressure. You've demonstrated both, Detective Chen added. There's something else you should know. Sarah Mitchell has specifically requested to thank you personally. She's doing well. She's back in school and receiving counseling. But she wanted you to know that your willingness to intervene saved not just her life, but her future. Ms. Harrison pulled out another folder. We've also received a request from Interpol. They're establishing a new task force focused on identifying human trafficking operations at tourist and cultural sites worldwide. They've asked if you would be willing to consult on security protocols and warning signs. Marcus felt overwhelmed. 3 weeks ago, he had been a routine palace guard worried about keeping his job to support his family. Now he was being offered opportunities he had never dreamed of. I need to ask, he said carefully. What about the protocol violations? I did break established procedures. Captain Morrison nodded. Yes, you did. And that's why we're revising those procedures. Your actions have helped us identify weaknesses in our current protocols. Sometimes the rules need to change to better serve the people we're supposed to protect. The meeting continued for another hour, covering details about the ongoing prosecutions, the international task force, and the training that would be required for Marcus's new position. When it finally concluded, Marcus walked out of the conference room with a formal commendation, a promotion, and a completely different understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. As he made his way back through the palace corridors, Marcus thought about the moment 3 weeks ago when he had decided to approach Sarah and the older woman in the parking lot. It had seemed like such a small decision at the time, just a guard following his instincts about a situation that didn't feel right. But small decisions, Marcus now understood, could change everything. They could save lives, expose criminal networks, and even change the course of a person's entire career. Most importantly, they could prove that doing the right thing, even when it meant breaking the rules, was sometimes the most important rule of all. His phone buzzed with a text message from his sister Emma. Saw the news about your commendation. Dad would be so proud. I'm proud too. When do I get to meet the famous hero? Marcus smiled as he typed back, "I'm not a hero. Just someone who decided to pay attention when it mattered." But as he walked through the palace gates at the end of his shift, Marcus realized that sometimes that was exactly what heroism looked like. Ordinary people making extraordinary choices when someone needed help. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a completely different world from the palace gates where his journey had begun. He was in Brussels, Belgium, addressing a conference of international security professionals about recognizing human trafficking indicators at tourist sites. The past half-year had transformed his life in ways he never could have imagined. After accepting the promotion to protective services, he had undergone intensive training in threat assessment, international law, and specialized security protocols. But more importantly, he had become part of a growing network of professionals dedicated to identifying and stopping human trafficking operations. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row of the conference hall, now serving as a victim advocate and speaking publicly about her experience to help train security personnel. She had not only recovered from her ordeal, but had channeled her experience into helping others. Seeing her confident and strong, addressing audiences about survivor support, filled Marcus with a pride he had never experienced in his previous work. "The key lesson I want to share with all of you," Marcus told the assembled security professionals, "is that protocols and procedures are essential, but they should never replace human intuition and judgment. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong." He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing statistics about trafficking operations disrupted at tourist locations over the past 6 months. The numbers were encouraging. 17 operations had been identified and stopped, resulting in 43 victims being rescued and over 100 arrests worldwide. "The techniques these criminals use are constantly evolving," Marcus continued. "They specifically target locations where security is visible but not intrusive, where unusual behavior might be attributed to tourism stress or cultural differences. They count on security personnel following routine procedures rather than investigating suspicious interactions." After his presentation, Marcus was approached by a young security officer from the Netherlands who looked remarkably similar to how Marcus had felt 6 months ago, dedicated but uncertain about when to trust his instincts. "Officer Thompson," the young man said, "I have a situation at my posting that feels wrong, but I can't point to anything specific that violates our protocols. What would you advise?" Marcus smiled, remembering his own uncertainty in that parking lot near the palace. "Tell me about what you've observed." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus listened as the officer described behavioral patterns and interactions that sounded disturbingly familiar. By the end of the conversation, they had developed a plan for the officer to document his observations and coordinate with local authorities to investigate further. "Remember," Marcus told him as they shook hands, "your job isn't just to follow rules. Your job is to protect people. Sometimes those two things conflict, and when they do, always choose to protect people." Later that evening, Marcus joined Sarah and several other conference attendees for dinner at a small restaurant near the conference center. The conversation was lively, covering everything from new training techniques to policy changes that were making it easier for security personnel to act on suspicious observations. "You know," Sarah said during a quiet moment in the conversation, "I never properly thanked you for what you did that day." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what felt right." "That's exactly why I need to thank you," Sarah replied, "because doing what feels right isn't always easy, especially when it means going against established procedures. You risked your career to help someone you didn't even know. And look how it turned out," Marcus said, gesturing around the table at the assembled group of advocates, investigators, and security professionals. "Your courage in speaking out has helped save dozens of other people." Sarah smiled. "I think we make a good team, the security officer who trusts his instincts and the survivor who found her voice." The next morning, Marcus flew back to London, where his new role in protective services awaited him. The work was more challenging and varied than his previous posting, involving everything from dignitary protection to consulting on security for international events. But the most meaningful part of his new position was the training he provided to security personnel across the United Kingdom. Every month he conducted seminars on recognizing human trafficking indicators, trusting professional instincts and knowing when to act outside standard protocols. During one of these training sessions, a participant asked him a question that had become common. What if I'm wrong? What if I see something suspicious but it turns out to be innocent? Marcus's answer had evolved over the months, but the core remained the same. Being wrong about suspicious behavior is embarrassing. Being wrong about ignoring obvious danger is devastating. I'd rather apologize for being overly cautious than live with the knowledge that I could have helped someone and chose not to. As he drove home that evening, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that Tuesday afternoon, when he noticed a frightened young woman in a palace parking lot. His decision to trust his instincts had not only saved Sarah's life, but it opened up opportunities and experiences he never could have imagined. More importantly, it had taught him that the rules and procedures he had spent years following were tools to help him serve others, not barriers preventing him from helping people in need. The best security professionals, he had learned, were those who understood when to follow protocol and when to follow their conscience. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. It was Sergeant Davies. Thompson, we've got a situation at the palace that could use your expertise. International visitors behaving in ways that have some of the staff concerned. Are you available to consult? Marcus smiled as he turned his car around and headed back toward the palace. On my way, Sergeant. What are we looking at? As he drove through the London evening, Marcus felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with knowing he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Sometimes the most important journeys began with a single decision to pay attention when something didn't feel right. Tonight, someone else might need him to trust those instincts again. And this time he would be ready from the very first moment.